6 months. It took me about 6 months to manage the pronunciation of this, but he'll explain to you a bit more about this condition. And then we have Daniel Cook, who directed the film The Bay View and who's also Glasgow based. So this session is going to be very informal. As I said, it's in equal measure to celebrate these filmmakers and the fact that their short films were just released. So they premiered at the Edinburgh International Film Festival in August, and they're about to start their festival life, their international festival life, but also to do a little bit of promotion for our flagship program, documentary program called Bridging the Gap, because we're currently calling for applications for the new season of Bridging the Gap. So that will be a good opportunity for us to get any questions from you, any questions that you may have on Bridging the Gap, but also for our filmmakers to share a little bit their experience of the program. And yes, so without further ado, I think I want to hear from the filmmakers. It's going to be a very simple session. I'm just going to ask them to introduce their films because I'm aware that most of you will not have been able to watch them yet, but rest assured they'll be coming to you or to a cinema or a festival next to you very soon, or an online platform very soon. They'll tell you a bit more about themselves and their projects. And then I have a few questions for each of them. But please feel free to raise your hand if you have any question, or to pop your question in the chat box. We want to keep it lively. So even if you have a question while someone is talking, just, pop it in the chat box and we'll ask them afterwards. Because there are quite a few people, it's a popular session, I'm just going to ask you to either raise your Zoom hand rather than raising your actual hand, because I can't see everyone, or as I said, writing in the chat box. So yes, Leah, I'm sorry, you're the first one on my screen, so I'm going to come to you. I'm going to come to you. I'm just going to someone. I'm going to come to you and ask you, to tell us a bit more about yourself, where you're coming from, and a bit more about Run With Her. Oh, you're on mute, Leah, sorry.
Okay, hi everyone. My name's Leah. So I directed Run With Her, which follows a running group based in East Belfast, and in particular one of the runners, Emmy Thornton, was just about to turn 16 when we were filming. So it's about how running and the club that she's a part of provides escapism for her during this quite sort of difficult time during COVID and obviously becoming a young woman. So on one hand, it follows obviously the sport and that aspect, but it's more about Emmy and her friends and their sort of coming of age experience. Yeah, and I made the film. I'm in Dublin, but then I came back during COVID to Belfast, so I was looking for inspiration around me and near me. So my old running club was obviously something that I knew very well and had access to. So I suppose it's my COVID film in a way, but it has hopefully nothing really to do with that world. So that's a little bit more.
Thank you, Leah. Stephen, can I come to you and ask you to tell us a bit more about yourself and prosopagnosia?
Sure. So my name's Stephen. I'm an animator. So I make like animated short films as well as like comics and zines, and I do some performance work as well. But my film's called prosopagnosia, and what that means is face blindness. So for me, that's when sometimes when I look at somebody's face, I can't tell who that person is, even if I know them, if it's somebody I know a lot in the past. So the film itself is like about 10, 15 years ago, I undertook a lot of like therapy sessions and just a bit understanding of what that means. And at the time I took like diaries, I created audio recordings, and I did a lot of sketchbooks of people's faces. And the film is really just me looking back at those things, and looking back at the sketchbooks, and it uses like animation as a way to like convey the emotions and the feelings that I was experiencing at that time. So yeah.
Thank you. And Daniel, coming to you in the Bayview.
Yep, so my name's Daniel Cook, and I'm an artist and self-shooting filmmaker based in Glasgow. I've been working on various different films on the North East Coast. This one in particular is called The Bayview, and it's about a family who have converted this really strange derelict hotel into their own home. And it's also a respite for international fishermen who come there when they land in Macduff. And it's really a glimpse into this very strange home and the different people who come in and out of the house.
Thank you, Daniel. So there are two other filmmakers who unfortunately couldn't join us this morning and who did Bridging the Gap films. The first one, Wada, made a film called Born in Damascus, which is a very personal exploration of the trauma of war in Syria and her reconnecting with her cousin who fled the war to settle down in Canada. And so it's a combination of personal archive and Zoom calls, what you might call a desktop documentary. And the other film is called West Country and is directed by Rowan Ings, and it's a very again a very personal film about the filmmaker's family, and especially a 13-year-old cousin who lives in the countryside, and this different way of life altogether, an exploration of the working class in the countryside. So you can read more information about all those projects on our website, and you can see some of the trailers as well to complement what the filmmakers have said. I just realized that I completely forgot to tell you a bit more what Bridging the Gap is, which I should have started because not everyone is familiar with the program. So in a nutshell, Bridging the Gap has been running for 19 years, and it's a hands-on training and production scheme for short creative documentaries. By short, we mean around 10-15 minutes. I have to say that this year, Daniel is the official winner of the longest Bridging the Gap film we've ever made at 18 minutes. That's because the story needed it. That gives you an idea that the frame is quite flexible. And we encourage strong visual ideas, but also a strong filmmaker's vision. We see Bridging the Gap as a bubble of freedom and creativity, moving from maybe studies or a career in broadcast and trying to move into the creative documentary industry. So yeah, it's a program that offers training and support during the post-production and the distribution of the films, and also cash commission, so you get some money to make your short film. As I said, the call for application is open and it will close on the 26th of September, so there's still time to apply if you have an idea. And the films are distributed internationally, and that's why I mentioned that their films were just about to start, hopefully, touring festivals in person and not just online. So I'm just going to maybe start with a question for Stephen, if you don't mind. And your film is a very personal essay on a condition that you have, and I was wondering, could you tell us a bit more about the use of animation to explore those very intimate experiences and how you build animation into documentary, and how that was the most interesting form for you to be exploring all this?
Yeah, I mean, because like face blindness is something which most people don't experience, to make my experience a bit more universal to people, I wanted to concentrate on the emotions that I feel. So for that, I felt that, animation was a good way to convey that, because what a good thing that animation does is it shows things which people can't normally see, so I really focused on that sort of element. So within my diaries and the sketchbooks, I kind of went through everything just through this archive and wrote down the different emotions that I experienced, whether it's sometimes isolation, sometimes, it was just like joy and happiness, because I felt that was something like quite different and unique about it, and I wanted to really get those points across. So then I just thought about, how am I going to do that within the animation itself? So because everything was like objects, like I had photos, cassette tapes, even just objects that I collected at that time, I knew that like I had to manipulate these objects in different ways. So I tried to kind of connect the objects with the different emotions. So that's really like the basis of what it was. I didn't really think like about a narrative structure, even though I think the film does have a structure. I was just kind of trying to connect the emotions together, try and create that sort of journey. And the idea for being like intimate and being personal was just, I think just the actual nature of itself, having like diaries and having audio recordings, just by, the actual nature of what these things are. I felt that was quite intimate. So the film itself, you don't really see anyone, which was also part of the theme as well, because it's face blindness. I didn't want to show my face. I didn't want to show anybody else's face. So things are kind of obscure and, kind of hidden. And I felt that to get the emotion across, I used the animation, because I knew that if things were hidden, you didn't get to see faces, and that would be quite, create a barrier between myself and the film and the audience. So really just getting that emotion and getting the animation to be quite visual and exciting. That was kind of like the approach that I took.
It's great, and you're right. The aim of documentary, especially when you're making your film about a very personal experience, is to be able to appeal to the largest audience possible. So someone in Japan, someone in in Alaska should be able to connect with you and with your experience. You're a trained animator, so for you it was quite an obvious way to make the film. But could you tell us a bit about the challenges that animation poses? Because I know that very often we get applications from people who want to use animation, and they may not be aware of how different it is, how long it takes, and how much your production schedule is different.
Yeah, I think I had an advantage because it was objects I'd already created and they'd already existed, so I wasn't necessarily developing new things, even though I did change them and update them and add things, but I already had these objects there. So I knew that I didn't have to like build new things or really, create new objects. But one of the things I did even before I'd started the film and even before I applied to bridging the gaps, I knew I had the idea for the film, as I like planned everything out. I worked out what type of animation I wanted to use. So it's a lot of like stop motion. There's a little bit like flip books and things that I use, and I knew exactly how I was going to create that and how I was going to film it and how I was going to edit it and how I was going to work with the audio. I wasn't 100% certain how it was going to look when I finished it, and I think that's part of the like experience of like creating like a film and creating animation. But definitely for planning things out ahead was really like the big thing for me anyway. And I think as well, just like for documentary, you do see quite a lot of animation used in documentary, and it tends to kind of like plug a gap in the storytelling sometimes. Like if you're using like archive footage and there's not something in the archive, you just put some animation in to fill that gap. But for me, I didn't want to do that at all. I wanted it to be, like I said before, about the emotion. So I had to make sure that, the animation sequences were actually conveying the story and conveying the emotion, and not just there just because it was something that I was missing. So I had to make sure all the objects and all the like that journey was complete. So yeah.
Thank you. That's such a great point you made about the use of animation. Sometimes used as a crutch, like, oh, we can't show that, so let's use animation. Thank you so much, Stephen. We'll come back to you. I'm sure people will have questions for you. Leah, can I come to you now? Your film is very different. It's much more observational, and you've been working with teenagers, and I wanted to ask you how you had approached the whole idea of working with teenagers, and how you had managed to also get their trust and go beyond the surface, because it can be very daunting to be in front of the camera for a teenager. So could you tell us a bit more about the research process, the development, and the relationship you build with your characters?
Yeah, so I had full access. We worked with a club, so the Willowfield Harriers was a club that I ran for whenever I was younger and Emmy's age. So automatically the coaches knew me. We had an amazing young female coach who came up as well, and she actually acted sort of as the bridge between us, the film production team, and the girls. I had an amazing producer as well. So it was always, we would set the time, I would go and have that space with the girls, and it would just be me and my DP, Radita Santosa. And the girls who were involved, especially Emmy, I could see that they enjoyed it, and that was really important. I think we only film sort of once a week, and we set that almost as a schedule that, you know, once a week we would do a couple of hours of filming that would be partially my idea, but also what they wanted to do. And we would always try and do it in groups, you know, so they could play off each other. And then we would, you know, get them a hot chocolate after, we'd sit and chat. So it was very much, it had to be an enjoyable process for them. And I think for a lot of them, it was great because they only hung out sort of during running training. So actually to be given a space where it was outside of running, and also I would give them little things like, I want you to speak to each other about how you feel about living in Northern Ireland. And that's maybe topics they would never otherwise have talked about. And I think they really enjoyed that. And we also, at one point, I think the energy was getting low. We were getting a lot of the same content, same discussions. So I brought in a friend who is a spoken word artist, and we did a session that was totally not running. We did loads of kind of games, exercises. We got the girls to bring objects, and it wasn't filmed. We recorded the audio from the session, but it was a totally free space. And from that session, we then went on and filmed more things, because from that session, we opened up conversations and themes and ideas about being a young girl that we hadn't reached in the context of running. So that's just some of the processes, yeah.
It's actually really interesting as well, because it's one of the characteristics of creative documentary. You have to spend time. You have to be involved with your protagonists, rather than just, you know, kind of factual style, landing in people's lives, capturing what you need to capture, and then off you go. You really need to build something more in creative documentary, and all the way until the film is being made and you show it to them, and you get on board their comments. And could you maybe also tell us, because when you were selected for Bridging the Gap, you had an idea, you knew you wanted to talk about teenage girls running, and it was quite a wide subject, and you had quite a bit of owning down to do. So maybe could you share that journey as a filmmaker of having an idea and a theme, many themes, and peeling off the layers until you get to the gist of what your film is going to be?
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing process. The idea was very wide, because I knew there was an idea and there was a film in that world. But actually going in, I did go in, and I tried to, I initially thought I was making a film about sort of running and how dedicated you had to be, and it was sort of more the harsher side of it. But then actually the contributors that I ended up working with, especially Emmy, that wasn't her story really. And actually what emerged was more about, you know, the friendship and the relationships in the club. And that's why they all go, and that's why they go back and they put themselves through this, and they are so dedicated. So you have to sort of also say, okay, this is what I want to make, but then I need to listen to the contributors and what their story is, and if that's not the story we're following, then you have to sort of rethink it. So eventually the film's about a friendship really, and that was driven by Emmy and Mabel and what we were observing. So it's constantly changing. I don't think you really find it till the edit almost what it's about. So
Well, that's a very positive thing to say. Don't worry if you feel lost, you won't find the film until it premieres on a big screen. Thank you, Leah. Daniel, I'm going to come to you now. So your film is also a very observational and stylistically quite stunning film. And I was wondering, could you tell us how you came across the hotel and Susie who runs it? And how did you decide who you were going to film and what the focus of the film was going to be? Because as you said in when you presented the film, it's such a rich microcosm with so many different stories. So maybe you could share a little bit that process again of developing the film.
Yeah. It's almost like the Bayview is a community inside a building, with a lot of different characters. But when I first approached it, I wasn't deliberately seeking out a film about fishermen or something like this. I was actually filming another project. So the Bayview's in Macduff and the northeast coast, and then there's another town along from that called Gardenstown. And I was also filming a project about travellers. And some people have mentioned to me, "Oh, you met this lady in Macduff? There's always guys standing outside her house and all this stuff." And I was going, "Never heard of it," and kind of just getting on with stuff with the project. And I went walking through Macduff and past the Bayview, and there's just these huge windows in the high street, and I kind of looked through the window and saw this lady sitting there on her rocking chair. And she kind of waved at me, and then I realized that she had a kind of open door policy, and so I went in. She invited me in for a cup of tea, and she just started talking away. And I was telling her about the project I was working on, Travelers and filming stuff, and then she had like all these other stories to exchange with me. In actual fact, she knew most of the travelers as well as the fishermen, and she knew everyone in the area, so she was really intrigued. And I kind of said, "Oh, this is really interesting. Do you mind if she said, "I've got, bedrooms upstairs and things like this." And I said, "Oh, I might be looking for someone to stay as a joke," because I was like, maybe in the next project I could have some accommodation. But she was like, "Yeah, no, if you ever want to stay here." So then the next time I went up, I stayed at hers, and in one of these sort of like military style bunk beds in one of the dorms. And when I got up in the morning, went downstairs into the kitchen, there was just all these guys from Ghana, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, just like cooking things, random conversations happening, all sorts of things going on. And I was kind of, this is really interesting. And I kind of just, it took a wee while before I even began to think about filming. And in actual fact, Susie wasn't really not keen to be filmed at first. She was quite awkward about it. And I went off filming The Fisherman, but then there was something missing. And then I went back to Susie. She kind of connected all those stories. And then it was quite tricky honing it in, as you say, like just too many different characters. And for a lot of practical reasons, the fishermen are obviously not there all the time. They land for like 2 weeks or whatever. Or it just really depends on what their schedule is. They could be there for less than 24 hours and then they're gone. So Susie being the one consistent person in the building, it just made sense to slowly bring the camera in, try and get her used to the camera. And yeah, I think what happened was I realized there always had to be someone else to bounce off of. And that's when she was at her best. So I thought, this is not really a film about one character. It's a film about lots of different characters, but she's at the center. And then it was quite strange because I hadn't really met her son, Matthew, who was in another part of the building. His room's like in the top floor or whatever. And he's never really around, except when he goes out to do his tasks and things. And I kind of thought, oh, it'd be cool to maybe include Matthew, but I was like, maybe that would just be for the wrong reasons. But then, when I started to see her relationship with her son, I was like, all right, there's a sort of synergy here. And then he was really delighted to be part of it. So yeah, but it was almost like he was there, but he wasn't there. As part of the process of filming, you're looking all over the other place, but there's someone standing next to you who realized, you know, is the last person you thought would come into the film. And he was just really great. And then obviously with the guidance that you guys gave me about trying to pick him out more as a character and finding some sort of arc overall. So it was quite a long process. And like Leah's saying as well, it's like it is handy to be like able to have it spread out over a period of time where you can edit something and find, it's not always the best idea to find the narrative in the edit, but if you have some time to pre-edit some stuff and pilot some things, it's kind of a real sign of whether it's working or not. So yeah.
Thank you. Maureen had a question about how much your film changed in the editing process, and I think maybe Leah, yours was the one that changed the most during the editing process. Can you maybe develop? And of course, Stephen and Daniel, feel free to chip in. But Leah, maybe we can come to you for that question.
Yeah, definitely. I think it changed so much because we also had so much footage because we were filming sort of every weekend, and though it was only for a couple of hours, you know, we had hours of footage. So it was hard to relate because there's a group of girls that we were following, and there was about 6 of them. And initially, I was kind of looking at each one of them and their little story, but that wasn't really strong enough. And then Emmy was naturally the protagonist. She was the girl that we spent the most amount of time with, and we decided we needed to kind of make it about her and also her friendship with her best friend Mabel. They had met through the running club. So we went through quite a lot of cuts and tried different things, and it kind of came down to finding that deeper layer. And I got, so voiceover came in, and that was a really useful tool because I could go and I just interviewed Emmy, me and her in my car, and the trust was there, and it was a different dynamic to when the camera was on her. And through doing that, I was able to sort of thread everything together through this, her speaking very authentically and honestly. And that's how we reached the final cut. But it definitely changed a lot. But I think it also showed that you have so much freedom in the edit. And it was a really enjoyable process, and kind of amazing what you can find amidst all the hours of footage.
Thank you, Stephen, Daniel. You both of you were almost editing as you were, as you were filming. So it was not as separate as Leah having an editing session once she had done all the filming. So maybe you want to add something and how different your process was.
Yeah, I didn't have like hours of footage because I was like using animation. So I really, like I said before, I planned everything out, and then really the editing at the end was more like tweaking for me because I was working with voiceover as well. But I realized there was lots of voiceover, so at times I knew I needed a bit of space. So it was even just like adding a couple of seconds here or there where there was visuals but no audio. That was really kind of like the editing process for me. I wasn't adding extra scenes or taking scenes away. I was more just tweaking the scenes to make sure they flowed a lot better together. But yeah, so like for me, like at the start of the project, I did all the animation, and then I did an edit, and then added some more animation that I felt was needed, and then from then on, it was tweaking and getting it synced with the audio. But yeah, so I didn't really have like hours of footage, but it changed slightly in the edit at the end. But yeah.
Yeah, and working with the sound design as well, which was a very important component of your film. Daniel, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it actually, and I was like, God, I shot so much stuff, and if you're doing it as a self-shooting filmmaker, it's kind of like you almost just do that because you're self-shooting and you're like, I've got all the time in the world, I'll just film some more stuff. And it's like, it can get a bit manic. And then you're like actually making the editing process so much more difficult. But actually the majority of the footage I did use was, you know, because I filmed a bit before the commission as well. And there was very little of that actually used in the end. I think it all came on the second time I went up there during the commission, that I actually was like, all right, discussed it with you guys, you know, these are the priorities. I had someone doing sound that also helped me get my stuff together, because I wasn't like, you know, when you're self shooting by yourself, you can have a schedule, but then it just doesn't always, you know, you have your own habits and you become a victim to your own habits. And then, so yeah, with Alan helping me out with the sound as well, I kind of felt like there was more of a schedule, and I was prioritizing the shots that I needed, rather than hours and hours of footage that just didn't really amount to anything. Because a lot of what you can end up filming is repetition of the same scene, and it's really difficult to see that at first, because you can become attached to shots and be like, this is a really beautiful shot, but is it actually saying anything, or is it just doing what happens later on in the timeline? So yeah, I think I wouldn't recommend my workflow to anyone. It's just like looking at hours and hours of footage. But yeah, I think you need to go, sometimes you just need to go through that process and know it yourself and be like, all right, so next time I'm going up, I'm going to structure this differently. I'm going to have a list of priorities. I'm going to have a schedule, shot list here, and each of these shots are going to count. And so you have to be ready to let go some of these shots as well, because you ask people to do things and it's just not what they're comfortable with, or they don't have the right response. So you have to chuck those shots and then just kind of wing it a bit on the day. But that's all part of the enjoyment. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's been fun.
And it's a good reminder that even at an application stage, so when you're going to put in an application to Bridging the Gap, you really need to remember that you have two anchors: the character you're going to follow, your main character, and your story. And these things will help you focus. These things will help you not get lost too much or get lost on purpose. That's the luxury. So it's the lesson in creative documentary. It's not about putting the camera and capturing whatever is going to happen in front of it. It's really influencing, it's really being prepared and being very proactive with what you're going to capture and what you're going to ask your protagonist, etc. So yeah, very valuable lesson, remembering always, because you had that, Daniel, you had your characters and the story was kind of came through at some point and it was clear it was going to be that story. So that really helped. Okay, well, I'm maybe going to open questions to the floor. So if you have any question for anyone, or a more general question about Bridging the Gap, if you want to raise your hand or put something in the chat box. No pressing questions. I can't see anyone raising their hands, so we're just gonna keep chatting. So as part, I'm just gonna ask you to remember what you did when you applied to Bridging the Gap. As part of the application, we ask people to submit a short visual material, a short sample, to help with giving us an idea of their protagonist or of the location or of their style. And I was just wondering, do you remember what you put in, and what would be your advice for potential applicants? Leah, go ahead.
I can't remember if I put in a teaser or anything. I think I definitely have photos. I had photos that I'd done with Emmy at the track. So yeah, because I was putting forward that I was going to have a protagonist and main character. It was important to get images of her, but also images that reflected the style that I want to go for, which was it's not a sports documentary. That was kind of what I wanted to get across. It was about the emotions and the coming of age and the emotional journey. So it was selecting images and only putting in images that reflected the style that I wanted the film to be. So I think I put in about 4 stills, but I didn't put in footage.
You did put in footage.
Did I put in
an interview with Emmy, and I think that's what also convinced us that you had that relationship.
Right, okay.
Closeness with her, because access is very important. So even if it was definitely not in the same style as the finished film, it was an interview in your car and you were talking, and it was definitely something that grabbed our attention and said to us, oh, she's already established that connection, and she has an interesting character. So yeah. Stephen, I think I remember you put in some animation, which was very important as well for us, because we saw that you could deliver, because sometimes people use the word animation in their application, but there is nothing to tell us that they will manage to achieve that.
Yeah, I know the film starts with like the opening up of this memory box, and I remember I filmed that, and that's not animation, so I think it was a good thing to put in my application, just because it was kind of easy to film. But as well, for doing the animation itself, I knew I'd have to do some tests beforehand, so I just did that at the start and then put the tests into the application. So it gave me the opportunity to work out how I was going to do the animation, but also just have something to show. So I don't think that footage made the final film, but it was just something that I could practically use when I did make the film, but also kind of conveyed the ideas as well. And I think as well, just in the application form, because it's a lot of objects that I was, for the subject, I just took photographs and added them in, because they, I think they, even though it wasn't animated, it showed what I was going to, convey in the themes that I wanted to get across. So yeah, so because it's a visual film, I just wanted it to be visual and that to grab people and get them excited about the film.
That is so important to add visual photo still. So many times we receive applications which are just the proposal is just writing, and we almost forget that the person is making a film. So really don't hesitate to add visual to your proposal, as long as it's meaningful and it relates to your story. Leah, do you want to add something or no?
No. Oh, sorry, but I'll.
I'm just going to read a few questions from the chat box. This question is for Stephen. I've been interested in doing stop motion for a while, and I know there's a lot of different animation styles and different ways to approach them. I was just curious, what's a good animation medium to start out with from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, animation's hard, and there's no way around that. It really kind of, I suppose it depends on your interest and your background. Like, I think stop motion is good if you've done like photography or sort of like model making as well. And like hand drawn if you can draw or enjoy drawing, but it has to be something which you're interested in, because you're going to be doing it for hours on hours. I know like a lot of people do like computer animation and CG, but I've done that as well. But sometimes that can be not as creative. I like building things and drawing things and things that you can hold, which was a big part of my film. So because I was interested in that, that's the animation that I did, because I knew that I'd have the time to do it and I'd be interested in it and it wouldn't get boring. So I would just focus on what you're interested in and then just do that. I think that's the best thing.
Wise words. We have a question from Ailey, who's on the road in the Highlands. I hope you're not driving. She was wondering what the priority for the teaser clip should be. She says she has a short interview with our protagonist, but very little B-roll, so very little footage, other type of footage. Is it okay to cut a fairly basic edit that focuses more on the character than style and include notes on style in the written proposal? So the answer is absolutely. I think at this stage we want to know that you have access to your character, that you already have built this relationship, and that the person is not going to turn around in November or in December to say, actually, I don't want you to make the film anymore. Yeah, absolutely, writing in the proposal what your visual ambition is for the film is totally fine. We're not expecting you to submit something very sleek. We're not expecting you to submit what the industry calls a sizzle reel, which is all show and probably not a lot of substance. We really want to connect with either your protagonist or your world. If you're doing animation, give us a glimpse of animation. If you're making a very experimental film or an essay type of film, make sure that you include a bit of that research footage or how you're going to be handling the various components of your film to give the selection panel a better idea of your visual style. So thank you for those questions. Anyone else? Oh, we've got a new message from Clement. What are some ways you gain a subject's trust? Especially, that question is for Daniel, when you're dealing with somebody who's not comfortable with talking on camera at first.
Yeah, depends what the personality is. I mean, Susie was quite reserved. The thing is, some people can be really chatty, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're comfortable with the camera. So I think it's just little steps at a time, because that's the only way you build up someone's confidence, and then convince them, and just even, you know, it is just a case of showing them what you're filming. You know, give them some playback of like some of the footage. Sometimes that can be unproductive as well, though, because you can do that and then they go, oh no, I don't like that, but they don't know what the context is of the work. So but yeah, I'd say, like, you know, given someone, you know, just convince them and, you know, spend some time with them. I think also it can be a question of like, how much time have you spent with this person? Have you got to know who they are first before you've asked for them, you know, for them to perform on camera? So yeah, I think so.
And I have to add that if you're selected to take part in the training workshops of Bridging the Gap, all the workshops are group workshops where everyone listens to everybody's idea and how they're developing it, etc. And so these questions are discussed at length because they vary depending on the project, but the relationship with the contributors, how to build trust, different interview techniques, just to make sure that you get what you want and the people are comfortable. All these things are discussed at length, and it's a huge part of the process. Also, the question of when to show the film to your protagonist and how much editorial control you should give them. These are huge questions, probably for another session, but yeah, it's all this is discussed. So we have a question from Leah, who's asking, was there any emotional moments for yourself personally while exploring and creating your short film? Like for Stephen, exploring your condition via film, or for the others when bonding and learning of other people's lives? Anyone wants to jump in?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like, I was definitely looking back at things. So it wasn't like, it was kind of like emotions I'd already dealt with. So I mean, I wasn't completely separate from it, but it wasn't something I'd already like kind of gone through. You know, I'd kind of like done with it, and now I can look back at it. I mean, so yeah, that was really it for me. It wasn't, you know, it was sort of something that was already in the past for me, so it made it a bit easier, I think.
Yeah, I remember it actually was very helpful. About halfway through, there was a very key emotional moment during one of the workshops we did with the girls, where one of them kind of expressed how she had a friend who she had drifted apart from, and how that was really difficult for her. And everyone, we were kind of all sitting, and everyone, all the girls in the group and myself and our spoken word artist, we just sort of registered with that. And I think that actually had like a very key influence for the rest of the film and the edit process, because that emotional sort of tie, we all felt it in that moment. And then we moved ahead with that. So it was a positive thing, I think, during filming, but the rest of it was quite straightforward, I think.
Thank you, Leah. And Daniel, this question is interesting for you as well, because the fishermen come with very traumatic life stories, or a lot of problems as well, and legal problems even. So you were confronted with that on a daily basis. So very interesting to hear from you.
Yeah, it was quite complex, because you could be in the room and someone could be going through some really big personal anguish with like their living situation or their working permits or whatever, like young guys as well who were like 20 to 18 or what, not quite as young as 18, probably in their 21 or whatever, just really young men from like other parts of the globe stuck in her house. But that's the best place you could be in that situation, because they'd normally be stuck on the boats. And I guess there was a nice sort of energy that Susie has this open door policy, and the guys ended up, a lot of the fishermen ended up trusting me through Susie, and that she has this kind of all-encompassing sort of motherly attitude to these sort of lost souls, as it were. And I actually felt at one point like I was, but no, that's it's a bit pretentious to say that, because I mean, like you're like, it's a privilege to be like filming like people who are like from very difficult situations. So but yeah, I think there was always sort of weird sort of emotional thing going on, and as well as Matthew and Susie and their relationship, because Susie's almost like a mother to all of these men, but she's a mother to Matthew first and foremost. And it was interesting seeing how she would switch from being kind and warm to being more pragmatic and sort of cold to like get a situation done, or if there had been an accident or whatever, and she was constantly switching between these sort of different modes. So yeah, it's interesting to see how people open up. If you spend enough time hanging around, it gets, yeah. So
maybe a question for Leah and you, Daniel. So you're both still in touch with your contributors. You're both still part of their lives, and how important that is for you. Would you have considered just closing the door and not talking to them again?
No. Yeah, like it's been good, because I think I was very nervous to show the girls the final film and show them the footage, because one thing that is really prevalent is just self-consciousness, like especially in teenage girls. And I was actually really surprised and relieved that they really liked it, and they liked to see the final product. So Emmy, like all the girls, especially Emmy's, we kind of keep in touch via text, and it's nice to sort of know that she's also, wanted to go to, maybe go to uni and figuring that out. So I kind of feel that we have that sort of relationship now, that, if she ever had any questions or anything, she kind of knows that she has that sort of bigger sister type if she wanted to, so. But the girls are also over 16, so they're, you can text, and it's a nice relationship, and we'll carry on, I think. Yeah. Thank
you. And Daniel, I if that's okay for me to say it, you started a fundraiser on GoFundMe to try and support Susie and her son Matthew and what they're doing. Is it still live? Can people?
Yeah. I'll post it.
Go and check. That, because that's another way of seeing how filmmakers can get involved and can support and thank their protagonists for sharing their life with them. So that's great. I am afraid we are about, well, we have about 5 minutes left, because we started a bit later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer Maureen's question from the beginning of the session about some of the practicalities of bridging the gap. And then I'll come back to you three, because what I would like you to do, you were applicants, and then you got selected, and then you got commissioned. And I would like you to share maybe with our attendees what you wish you had done differently in your application based on what you experienced in the workshop, etc., or what you're happy you did at the application stage and you thought it was very useful and it worked in your favor. So I'm just going to leave you a bit of time to think about that, and then I'm going to go back to Maureen's question, which was, so what support do filmmakers get in terms of distribution from SDI and Bridging the Gap? Is there a bursary for attendance and any submission fees? Any advice on the festival circuit for the film? So really good practical questions. So participation, application and participation to Bridging the Gap are entirely free. Every year we shortlist 12 participants. So normally it's 11 Scotland-based participants and 1 Northern Irish filmmaker. We've decided, I mean, last year it worked really well, and we've decided to do the same this year. All the workshops will be held online, which actually helps with accessibility in many ways, especially when people live really far away. The kind of support we have is childcare support, or any carer. If you're a carer, we'll be able to provide you, to help you with that, to cover for the time you're spending attending the workshop. And in terms of the distribution support, so yes, there is distribution support. As I said, the films are then distributed for a period over a year. And filmmakers don't have to pay for any submission fees. We submit them to awards, etc. So that's in-kind support. We also develop a distribution strategy in collaboration with the filmmakers, because each film is potentially quite different and can tap into different festivals. So that's really bespoke support for each of the films, and it's really proven useful, because the films have been a lot of Bridging the Gap films have been to really top film festivals and had beautiful lives for many years, actually. And definitely advice on the festival circuit. We are not distributing the films for the filmmakers. We ask them to also be quite involved in the marketing and also coming up with potential ideas. So again, it's combining training and learning about the industry with hands-on distribution. So I hope I answered your question. There are a couple of messages. Oh yeah, just thank you. Alan, I'm sorry, you had a question about the challenges the filmmakers had to overcome in the editing process. I'm sorry, we don't really have time to answer that question, but I think it's worth noting that with Bridging the Gap, if you get commission, you have to work with a producer and you have to work with a team. So you have to work with an editor, you have to work, if you want to, if you're not a self-shooter, with a DOP. The reason why we encourage that is because filmmaking can be such a lonely adventure, and then you can lose sight of the film, and collaborating is actually a really good way of making a better film. And it means that if you're facing real challenges in the edit suite, you're not on your own. You have an experienced editor, or you can have an editing consultant who's going to be there for you and help you overcome those challenges. And you also have us, so we are acting as exec producers for the films, and we're available at any point during the production and the post-production to help and answer any question. So I hope that answered your question. Now coming back to you with my with my question about what you wish you had done differently, or you did something that worked really well. So maybe Stephen, I'm going to come to you first.
I suppose, like what you're saying about collaboration, I mean, I think I maybe left that a bit too late in the process, because like I was doing animation, which was quite specific, but I kind of maybe should have started working with a sound designer sooner. So I think it worked out all right at the end, but it just meant that at the end I was completely focused on the sound, when at the start I was completely focused on the filming, and it would be maybe better to kind of mix those two up to get a bit of a break from each other.
Okay,
yeah.
and at the application stage, is there anything when you think back about the application that you put in, was there anything you would have done differently?
I don't know.
Oh, not.
Yeah, I mean, I felt as if, for me, that I kind of wanted to come across as if I'm like the expert at making this film, and yeah, that was it really. I just wanted to show how confident I was that I could make it.
Yeah,
but
the urgency is a very useful tip to show that you're the best person to make the film and that this film needs to be made. It's always good to explore that in your proposal. Thank you, Stephen. Leah, can I come to you? Oh, you're muted, Leah.
Yeah, I think it's always valuable having trusted readers before you make the application. So I definitely have a few people that would give me very open and honest and tough feedback, but I always find they're the most beneficial people. And maybe reaching out and getting a few readers to feedback my application before submission would be something I would do.
Great tip. Thank you, Leah. And Daniel?
Yeah, I was trying to think there. It's quite difficult actually. But I think I'm maybe obsessing less over the style of the piece and actually just the access to the characters. So if you do get access and you can show video footage of your character just with a phone or whatever, then just spending time finding that content that sits well to show to SDI, because I think I in a way created a trailer, but then it wasn't really, you know, it was like a trailer and it had lots of things in it, but it actually avoided showing Susie. And what using a phone obviously gives you like the very raw nature of like content and not like masking it with style. So maybe that's something that I've done differently.
Great. Well, that's brilliant. You can run the workshops for us now. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Leah, Stephen, and Daniel. As I said, your films are going to be shown in festivals very soon, and they'll probably be on online platforms in a few months as well. So keep an eye. We'll be promoting them heavily, so keep an eye on our social media platforms. And as for Bridging the Gap, applications are still open. You can check our website for more information, and you can absolutely get in touch with us at any point if you have any specific questions. And we really, really look forward to reading your applications. I have to say, it feels a bit weird to already be looking for new participants when these films have just been finished, but yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from you very soon, and thanks again for joining us today. Have a good week.